Hello, everyone. My name is Anna. I was born to loving parents, Robert and Lisa Anderson, in a small suburban town. My dad was a journalist, and my mom worked as a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal until I turned 15, and then suddenly, everything changed. It was a rainy Friday evening when my parents were driving home from a dinner party. I was at home with my grandmother, watching some silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill that went through me when I heard my grandmother crying softly in the kitchen. The next few days were a blur. They told us my mom had died instantly in the crash. My dad survived, but just barely. When I finally saw him in the hospital, he was just a shadow of the man I once knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctor said he'd never walk again. "Anna," he whispered, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault. A drunk driver had crashed into their car. But as I got older, I realized he was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we would face, for the mother I had lost, and for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Robert Anderson, was stronger than he gave himself credit for. After he got out of the hospital and adjusted to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He had always been a talented writer, and now he focused all his energy on his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I entered my teenage years, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, make friends, and have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We watched old movies together, argued about books, and he helped me with my homework. When it was time for college, Dad insisted that I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right, so I went off to college. I attended the University of Pennsylvania and studied accounting. That's where I met Sophie, who became my best friend. Through Sophie, I met her second cousin, Ethan. Ethan was kind and funny, and he didn't flinch when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they got along right away, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. Later, Ethan told me, "Your dad is cool, and you're amazing for taking care of him all these years." I tried to play it off, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life with love, laughter, and even a family of my own someday. After graduation, things started to fall into place like a puzzle. I got a job at a local tax service, and Ethan started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 4 years before he proposed to me on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was thrilled, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Ethan, but I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Ethan smiled wide and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the three of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. As I stood there holding Ethan's hand, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Margaret, and my sister-in-law, Emily. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So, your father is handicapped?" Margaret asked during our first meeting, wrinkling her nose like she smelled something bad. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to stay calm. "But he works as an editor?" "How nice," she interrupted, clearly not interested. Then she turned to Ethan and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but Ethan immediately defended me. "Mom, Anna is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Margaret up, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Emily, following her mother's lead, was just as cold toward me. After the wedding, true to his word, Ethan moved in with Dad and me, and our life settled into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office while Ethan was on the road for days at a time. When he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Margaret and Emily visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They acted like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once I overheard Margaret whispering to Emily, "It's a shame. Ethan could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I kept quiet for Ethan's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Margaret and Emily, I broke down in tears. Ethan found me in our bedroom, crying. Hey, he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I sobbed. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Ethan's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Margaret and Emily. As the months went by, Ethan's trucking business began to grow. He was always on the road, traveling across the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I focused on my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Ethan called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Anna, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I liked the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place. A spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Ethan's income, mine, and the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Sunday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in and making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. It was peaceful, almost perfect. Then we decided to have a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and, yes, even Margaret and Emily. The party was in full swing when they showed up, fashionably late as usual. They walked in, looking around with barely hidden envy. As we walked through the house, I could see Margaret calculating something. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Anna," she said quietly, "this would be perfect for Ethan and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" I managed to say. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Margaret continued. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could respond, Margaret marched out to the patio, where Dad was talking with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him toward the driveway. "Margaret," I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors." I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Ethan heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he yelled, "what the hell are you doing? Let go of Robert's chair right now." Margaret looked shocked by Ethan's tone. "But honey, I was just—" "I don't want to hear it," Ethan cut her off. "You and Emily need to leave, now." After they left, Ethan apologized over and over to Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I had no idea she would do that. I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and patted Ethan's hand. "It's not your fault, son," he said gently. "Some people just can't understand." Life settled into a new routine after that incident. Margaret and Emily kept their distance, which was fine with me. Ethan focused on his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help pay for our new home. I split my time between my job at the tax office, taking care of our home, and looking after Dad. 4 years passed quickly. Our life became comfortable and predictable. Ethan was on the road most of the time, but when he was home, our little family was happy, Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. A man's unfamiliar voice greeted me. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Officer Henderson from the Highway Patrol." My heart sank. "Yes?" I barely managed to say. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Ethan Brooks, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and "didn't make it" floated around me, but I couldn't understand them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that the reality began to hit me. Ethan was gone. The next week was a fog of grief and disbelief. I went through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely understanding what was happening. The day before the funeral, I gathered my courage and called Margaret. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from a newspaper obituary. "Hello," Margaret's sharp voice answered. "Margaret, it's Anna," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Ethan. He's gone. There was an accident." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then, to my shock, Margaret's voice came back, dripping with anger. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made him work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son." I was stunned. "Margaret, Save it," she snapped. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy, but don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it." The line went dead. I stood there, foam in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Ethan's funeral was gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. The church was full. Ethan was well liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had come to pay their respects. After the service, as people passed by to offer their condolences, I noticed that Margaret and Emily were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even bothered to show up for their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together." As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange because I was sure I had turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the house. My heart started pounding. Were we being robbed? On the day of Ethan's funeral. I quickly helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Margaret and Emily in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Margaret turned to me, her face a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, Anna dear, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Ethan is gone." I was speechless. Emily added, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Don't worry. You can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the anger building inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Margaret had the nerve to look offended. "This house belongs to us now. All of Ethan's property does. We're his family, after all." "Like hell you are," I exploded. "Where were you today, at his funeral?" Oh, that's right. You couldn't be bothered to show up. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. We were busy making arrangements. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We'll meet you out by tomorrow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Ethan, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Margaret and Emily exchanged worried looks. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. Now, Anna, Margaret began, but I cut her off. No, you have exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Ethan and I bought it together. You have no right to be here. Maybe it was the steel in my voice or the fire in my eyes, but Margaret and Emily finally realized they had gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Margaret turned to me with a sneer. This isn't over, Anna. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. The days after Ethan's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Ethan's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Margaret and Emily would try to take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, afraid it was Margaret following through on her threat of legal action. Mrs. Brooks, a crisp, professional voice asked, "This is Scott Davis from Davis and Partners. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I felt a small flicker of hope. His will. I didn't know he had one. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Brooks came to see us about 5 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing. I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind spinning. Why hadn't Ethan told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Davis's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to sit near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Davis opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Davis began to read. "I, Ethan Brooks, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Anna Brooks." I gasped, and Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Davis continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Anna use these resources to care for herself and her father, Robert Anderson, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Ethan was taking care of us. "There's more," Mr. Davis said gently. "Mr. Brooks left a letter for you." He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dear Anna, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Robert. Please know that you two are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Robert were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Anna. You and Robert, not them. Take care of each other, live your lives to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Ethan." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Davis gave us a moment before speaking again. "Mrs. Brooks, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy." I looked up, sniffling. "What does that mean?" Mr. Davis gave me a small smile and said, "It means you'll be receiving a large sum of money, enough to pay off your mortgage and more." As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Ethan had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Margaret's sleek sit-in. "Oh no," I muttered. "What now?" Sure enough, Margaret and Emily were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Ethan's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. "Anna," Margaret began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet. We need to talk about Ethan's estate. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. No, Margaret, we don't. Ethan left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Margaret was speechless. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks after our meeting with the lawyer were busy. I threw myself into settling Ethan's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and just as Mr. Davis had said, it was enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Ethan's desk, I found a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and saw pages filled with his messy handwriting. It was a journal of sorts, full of his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read, "Want to make sure they have the best start in life." My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Ethan's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "Oh, Ethan," I whispered, holding the notebook close. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Ethan. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. "It's okay, Anna," he said in my dream. "Everything's going to be all right." I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. The morning sickness didn't go away in the days that followed. At first, I thought it was just stress and grief, but a small voice in the back of my mind suggested something else. After a week of this, I found myself in the pharmacy, staring at pregnancy tests. With trembling hands, I bought one and hurried home. The 5 minutes I waited for the result felt like the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, there were 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: joy, fear, grief, and hope, all swirling together. "Anna?" Dad's voice came through the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression changed from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad?" I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Anna. And this baby is a gift, a piece of Ethan that will live on." His words hit me deeply. This baby was a part of Ethan, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to fade, replaced by a strong determination. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all." As we headed to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope growing inside me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Ethan's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly waiting for the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Margaret's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I walked to the front of the house, one hand instinctively resting on my swollen belly. Margaret and Emily stood on our porch, looking both uncomfortable and slightly desperate. "Anna," Margaret began, her voice missing its usual sharpness, "we need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emily spoke up, her eyes darting around nervously. We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had put us through, they had the nerve to ask for more. I'm sorry, I said, my voice firm but calm. That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore. Margaret's eyes narrowed as they noticed my pregnant belly, her face twisted with shock and disgust. You're pregnant? She spat. Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Ethan's body isn't even cold in the ground. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I didn't bother explaining that it was Ethan's child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled, a small, secretive smile that seemed to unsettle Margaret even more. My personal life is none of your concern, I said calmly. Now I think it's time for you to leave. Margaret looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Emily's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me.